Snow fell thick over the Samberg estate, soft as ashes over a kingdom that didn't know it was burning. Inside, the air smelled of cedar cinnamon and the quiet violence of expensive peace. Lupita stood by the 12-foot Christmas tree, her reflection shimmering across the glass wall like a ghost, half forgotten by its own story. The emerald silk dress clung to her like a memory of better days. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but restraint. 5 years. 5 years of learning the language of silence, of dinner conversations where she wasn't expected to speak. 5 years of pretending that love could outlast humiliation. And now, on Christmas morning, she would finally stop pretending. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her, crisp and deliberate. Alan Samberg entered the room, the embodiment of tailored arrogance. His suit was a shade too dark, his smile a degree too cold. "Darling," he said, voice smooth as the whiskey he loved more than truth. "Everyone's waiting in the drawing room." Lupita didn't turn. "Are they?" "They are," he replied, adjusting his cufflinks as though the world depended on symmetry. "And so am I." When she finally turned, her eyes met his pale blue sharp, the kind of eyes that saw everything but never understood. "Alan," she said softly, "you've always loved performances. Let's not keep your audience waiting." The drawing room looked like a page torn from an old money magazine, roaring fireplace velvet drapes, and the Sambergs, a dynasty wrapped in self-importance. Eleanor the matriarch sat like a throne had grown beneath her bones. Harrison Allen's father stood by the mantel checking his gold watch with performative boredom. Genevieve Allen's sister pretended to scroll through her phone recording what she hoped would be Lupita's humiliation. "Ah," Eleanor said, her tone dipped in sugar and poison. "So she arrives. I suppose punctuality was never a virtue where you come from. 5 years ago, that would have hurt." Today, Lupita smiled. "You're right," she said. "Where I come from, we valued kindness more than clocks." Eleanor's painted smile faltered. Harrison cleared his throat. Genevieve's camera light blinked red. Alan stepped forward, holding an envelope like a magician about to reveal his final trick. "Lupita," he began with rehearsed sincerity, "we need to discuss our future, or rather the lack thereof." He placed the envelope between them. The room grew still, the air heavy with expectation. Lupita looked at the letterhead, Cromwell, Ashmont and Associates, the city's most ruthless divorce firm. 5 years. Alan continued, "We've tried to make this work, but the truth is, we're from different worlds. This was never going to last." Genevieve's lips curved in satisfaction. Harrison exhaled through his nose, relieved. Eleanor's eyes gleamed. And then Lupita laughed. It was a sound they'd never heard before. Not brittle, not bitter. A laugh born of something stronger than pride, clarity. Alan frowned. "What's funny?" "You are," she said simply. "All of you." She picked up the envelope, weighed it in her hands, as if it were a feather dressed as a stone. Then, without breaking eye contact, she tore it open and read. Clause after clause. Words meant to shrink her down to nothing. No claim to assets, no acknowledgement of her contribution. A modest settlement enough to keep her quiet and invisible. She placed the papers down carefully, as if they were something fragile. "You really thought I'd beg?" Eleanor's voice sliced through the air. "Don't be dramatic, dear. Consider this a graceful exit. Not everyone gets to marry into legacy." "Legacy," Lupita repeated, tasting the word like something spoiled. "Is that what you call it?" Alan sighed. "Lupita, let's not do this. It's Christmas." "Exactly," she said, moving toward the tree. "A season for gifts, isn't it?" She reached beneath the branches and retrieved a small box wrapped in silver paper and tied with a single white ribbon. "The kind of gift one gives at the end of a story," She turned and placed it gently on the coffee table. "Merry Christmas, Alan." He frowned, wary. "What is this? Open it." Alan hesitated. His mother's eyes narrowed. Genevieve raised her phone higher. The ribbon came undone with a whisper. Inside lay 2 envelopes. The first bore a company seal. Alan's name in embossed gold. He opened it, and the blood drained from his face. "No," he breathed. "No. This can't be." "Oh, but it can." Lupita interrupted softly. "Every signature authenticated. Every document verified. The sale went through 3 months ago." "What sale?" Harrison barked. "The sale of Samberg Development Group," she said. "To Sterling Blackwood." "The Blackwood Group." Harrison's voice cracked. "You sold our company to him." Lupita tilted her head. "Correction, my company. You see, 3 years ago during that federal investigation, Alan needed a clean name to hold the assets. Mine. A detail you all found convenient to ignore." Eleanor's composure slipped, a hairline fracture running through her mask. "That company is worth nearly $1 billion, was Lupita said. Now it belongs to someone who builds, not destroys." Alan's hands shook as he reached for the second envelope. His fingers slipped twice before he managed to open it. An ultrasound image slid out and fluttered onto the table. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Lupita spoke, voice steady as light through glass. 12 weeks. Twins. Eleanor's gasp was sharp enough to cut air. Genevieve's phone fell into her lap. Harrison muttered a curse. "You planned this," Alan whispered, eyes wild. I endured," she corrected. "I waited. I watched. And I learned. While you and your mother discussed my fertility like a stock market forecast, I was writing my own future." "Lupita." "No," she said quietly. "Don't say my name like you ever earned it." She walked toward the window, her reflection merging with the snow outside. "For 5 years, I tried to make this a home. I gave up my career, my pride, my voice. And every day you reminded me I was temporary." She turned her eyes, meeting his. "Now I'm eternal. In your history. In your downfall." Eleanor rose from her chair, trembling. "You can't do this. We'll fight you." "You already did," Lupita said. "You just didn't know the battle was over." She stepped closer, so close that Eleanor could see the calm in her eyes. Not triumph, not hatred, but peace. "The girl from Louisiana, the one you said would never belong, now owns the empire you built on exclusion." Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for the table. "What about the child?" "Children," Lupita corrected. "They'll be born free. They'll know their worth from their first breath." Alan staggered forward, his mask cracking completely. "Lupita, wait, please. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," she said gently. "You just didn't expect consequences." She took her coat from the chair, slipping it over her shoulders. The emerald silk shimmered like armor. At the doorway, she paused, looking back one final time. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. "May you finally learn what it feels like to lose everything you took for granted." As she walked down the marble hall, her heels echoed like the ticking of a clock striking midnight on a dying dynasty. Outside, snowflakes melted against her skin, cold giving way to warmth, endings dissolving into beginnings. Her car waited in the drive. Not the family's Bentley, but one she'd bought herself in her own name. When she closed the door, the world outside blurred into white. She placed a hand on her stomach, a small protective gesture. "Your story begins with your mother's freedom," she whispered. And for the first time in 5 years, Lupita smiled. Not because she'd won, but because she'd finally stopped losing herself. Glimpse of what's next. As the car disappeared into the snowfall, her phone vibrated once. A single message glowed on the screen. "We need to talk." sterling blackwood. She looked out the window at the horizon where night met light and whispered almost to herself. Maybe this time the story won't be about revenge, but redemption. The snow kept falling soft and endless, as if the universe itself was covering the past in silence and blessing whatever was yet to come. Snow was still falling quiet and endless, wrapping the city in a hush that made even heartbreak sound sacred. 3 days had passed since Christmas morning. 3 days since Lupita walked out of the Samberg mansion without looking back. Yet in the silence of her new apartment overlooking Central Park, the ghosts of that day refused to rest. The world outside glittered with white, but her heart was a field after fire, still smoking, still searching for something to grow again. She stood barefoot by the window, wrapped in a wool robe, the city a blurred constellation beneath her. Her reflection hovered in the glass eyes that had forgotten softness, lips pressed thin as if holding back a truth too heavy to speak aloud. Her phone began to ring. For a moment, she thought it was the wind. Then she saw the name on the screen. Alan. The sound of that name was still a wound that hadn't scabbed. She didn't move. The phone rang again and again until the silence between rings felt louder than her own breathing. Finally, she answered, "Lupita." His voice cracked like frost underfoot. "You picked up." For a long moment, she said nothing. The only sound was her slow, steady inhale and the faint hum of the city that had already forgotten their love story. "You shouldn't be calling," she said at last. "I had to." He sounded different now, stripped of arrogance, trembling small. "I can't sleep. I can't stop thinking about you." "You've had 5 years to think about me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "And you used every one of them to forget." He exhaled shakily. "You don't understand." "That night Alan," she interrupted, "don't rewrite what's already written." He was silent. Somewhere behind him, she could hear the faint clink of a glass, the echo of loneliness disguised as luxury. Then barely a whisper. "I still love you." The words drifted across the distance like smoke from a dying candle. Lupita closed her eyes. Her free hand slid to her stomach to the quiet, steady pulse of the life she carried. 2 tiny heartbeats that didn't yet know what betrayal meant. She imagined Alan's face pale and handsome in that cold, self-centered way. The same man who had watched her sign her name on divorce papers as if it were a game. Now he wanted redemption, but only because the mirror had turned cruel. "You love the idea of me," she said, finally opening her eyes. "The woman who smiled beside you in photographs, who made you look progressive, enlightened, untouchable. You never loved the one who argued, who dreamed, who dared to outgrow you." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with realization. "Lupita," he began, but she was already shaking her head. "I used to think love was sacrifice," she said softly. "That if I gave enough, if I was good enough, you'd see me. But now I know love isn't about being seen. It's about being safe." Her voice faltered, but only for a breath. "And I was never safe with you." She ended the call. The dial tone hummed in her ear, a thin, mechanical lullaby to a love that had died long before she buried it. For a moment, she stood there still suspended between who she'd been and who she was becoming. Then she placed the phone down slow and deliberate, as if laying a flower on a grave. Her reflection in the glass shifted. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She was reborn in the quiet the way dawn rises, not with noise, but with certainty. Outside, snowflakes drifted sideways under the wind. In the distance, the park's lamps glowed like a string of soft confessions. The following morning, she woke to light spilling across the wooden floor, gentle and forgiving. She brewed tea. Not coffee, still reminded her of him, of mornings in that house where silence was thicker than conversation. On the kitchen counter sat a letter she'd written but never sent. To myself it began. She read it again, her handwriting steady, the ink slightly smudged. You owe no one an explanation for surviving. You do not need to prove your worth through suffering. You are allowed to rest to love again, even if that love is only your own. She smiled faintly. Only my own, she whispered, tracing the words with her fingertips. But even as she said it, she felt a pull, not toward the past, but toward something undefined, something waiting. That afternoon, she went out for the first time since leaving Alan. The city had thawed slightly, the snow melting into silver puddles that mirrored the clouds. She wore a long beige coat, her scarf wrapped high, her stride calm but deliberate. At the corner cafe near Fifth Avenue, she ordered chamomile and sat by the window. The warmth of the cup seeped through her gloves, a reminder that even small comforts could feel like miracles. People passed by outside, couples laughing, children dragging sleds, an old man feeding pigeons. Life moved on uncaring, beautiful. And then across the street, she saw him. Sterling Blackwood. He wasn't supposed to be there, not in her world, not yet. But there he was, tall, dark suit under a wool coat, a face both sharp and kind, the kind of man who didn't fill silence with noise. He stood talking to someone on the phone, the snow catching on his eyelashes like frost on steel. Lupita's heart gave a strange, cautious flutter. He looked up as if sensing her gaze. Their eyes met just a flicker, a moment too brief to name, but long enough to stir something inside her that had been asleep for years. He smiled, not the practiced smile of a man trying to charm, but a quiet, almost respectful nod, like he'd seen her pain and chose not to intrude on it. She looked away, first unsure why her hands trembled. That night back in her apartment, she dreamt of the ocean, not the calm kind, but the wild living sea that mirrored the storms inside her. She dreamt of walking into the waves, not to disappear, but to begin again. When she woke, the dream lingered like salt on her skin. She made tea again, turned on the record player, and let Nina Simone fill the air. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number this time. She hesitated, then answered. Ms. Harris. A man's voice, smooth, professional, familiar. This is Sterling Blackwood. Lupita froze. I'm sorry to call so early, he continued. I just wanted to thank you. The transition documents you left were flawless. You saved us months of work. It's my job, she said, though she wasn't sure if it still was. There was a pause. Still, he said quietly, not everyone handles loss with grace. The word loss caught her off guard. And what makes you think it was a loss? Another pause. This one thoughtful, because only someone who's lost something important can write legal clauses that read like forgiveness. She didn't reply. I'll be in the city next week, he added. If you'd like to discuss your next move professionally or otherwise, I'd be honored to meet. Before she could answer, the line went dead. She stared at her reflection in the window again. The same woman, the same city, but something had changed. A thread of light had found its way through the cracks. That evening, the phone rang once more. This time it was Alan again. She let it ring. Then she picked it up, not to answer, but to turn it off. The silence afterward was profound, not empty, but clean. Lupita stepped out onto the balcony, the winter air biting at her cheeks. She looked up at the night sky, where snow fell in slow motion, soft and unashamed. I forgive you, she whispered, not for him, but for herself. Her hand moved again to her belly. The twins stirred faintly, like small echoes of courage. You'll know love, she murmured. but not the kind that hurts. Below, the city pulsed with life, taxis sliding through slush laughter, spilling from bars, streetlights, blinking like promises. And far away, somewhere beyond the skyline, she imagined a man with silver eyes and a quiet voice thinking of her too. When she went back inside, she wrote one final line in her journal before closing it for the night. Love didn't die tonight. It evolved. The lamp beside her flickered once, casting soft gold light on the curve of her smile. Outside, the last snow of winter fell like confetti, not mourning what was gone, but celebrating what might come. The church smelled of lilies and rain. Lupita stood alone beside the coffin, her hands clasped together, as if she could still hold her father through prayer. Outside, thunder rolled over Louisiana skies, the kind of storm that didn't just fall, but remembered. The service had ended hours ago, the guests long gone. Only the echoes remained, condolences wrapped in politeness, sympathy offered like paper flowers. She hadn't cried, not once. Instead, she sat now in her father's old library, a sanctuary built of oak and silence. Every shelf seemed to hum with memory. Law books lined the walls, their spines cracked from decades of use. On the desk before her lay a single open page, her father's handwriting steady and sure. Congai dignity is the only wealth no one can steal. She traced the words with her fingertips. The ink had faded, but the truth had not. For years, she had tried to live by that line. Yet somewhere between loving Alan and surviving him, she had misplaced her own dignity, traded it for belonging. Now all that remained was the echo of her father's voice and the ache of what she'd allowed herself to forget. A soft knock came at the door. She looked up startled. A man stood in the doorway, tall, dark suit rain still glistening on his shoulders. His presence seemed to steady the air. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said. His voice was deep-textured like it had traveled through too many sleepless nights. "They told me I might find you here." Lupita studied him. "You knew my father." He stepped closer, offering a quiet nod. "Sterling Blackwood. He was my mentor when I first started in corporate law. I owed him more than I could ever repay." At the mention of his name, something flickered in her memory. News articles, financial journals, the whispered reverence that followed successful men. But his eyes, soft and human, betrayed none of that power. "He spoke about you often," Sterling continued. "Said you had his mind and your mother's fire." Lupita smiled faintly, though it hurt. He exaggerated. "I don't think he did." The rain tapped gently against the windows. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. "Everyone's gone," she said quietly. "Even the ones who promised they'd stay." Sterling hesitated, then crossed the room and picked up the fallen pen from her desk. "Grief makes a lot of people leave. They think silence is contagious." His tone wasn't pitying. It was simple, factual, and that made it oddly comforting. Lupita met his gaze. "I thought I understood loss. Then it taught me another language. And what does it say? That sometimes," she said, "the only way to survive is to start over." They talked for hours long after the storm had passed. About her father's cases, about law and fairness and the brutal symmetry of justice, how it always arrived too late or cost too much. Sterling listened the way few men did, not waiting for his turn to speak, but hearing. He didn't interrupt when her voice wavered. He didn't offer solutions. He simply stayed. When she finally fell silent, he said, "You know, your father once told me the hardest battles are the ones fought without witnesses." Lupita looked down at her hands. "Then maybe that's why I'm tired." He leaned forward slightly. "Tired or ready?" The question landed like a spark in dry grass. ready for what she asked. To stop surviving, he said softly, and start fighting back. Their eyes met, and for the first time in months, she didn't look away. Days blurred into weeks. Sterling began visiting her office at first on the pretense of helping with her father's estate, then simply because he kept finding reasons not to stay away. She had expected him to be like the men she'd known in Alan's world, polished, predictable, always performing. But Sterling was different. He carried power the way others carried silence, with ease, never flaunting it. One afternoon, as they reviewed documents together, he noticed her hesitation. "You could rebuild everything," he said. "The practice your name. You have the mind for it." Lupita shook her head. "I have the mind, yes, but not the freedom." "Then take it. It's not that simple." "It never is," he said, smiling gently. "But simplicity is overrated." She looked at him, really looked, and something inside her shifted. The woman she had been obedient, careful, composed, began to peel away layer by layer. For the first time, she saw herself through someone else's eyes, not as the shadow of a failed marriage or a name borrowed from someone else's family, but as a force of her own making. One evening, she invited him to the old library again. The house was quieter now, emptier. She poured 2 glasses of wine, though she barely drank. "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" she asked. Sterling tilted his head. "Every day. But I'm more tired of watching people lose because they were told they couldn't win." Lupita's fingers tightened around her glass. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," he said. "But neither is staying where you're unwanted." That word, unwanted, cut deeper than she expected. She set her glass down, staring at the ink stains on her fingertips. "When Alan and I divorced, everyone said I'd ruined him. But the truth is, I never had that power. He ruined himself. I just stopped pretending not to see it." Sterling leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You didn't ruin anyone. You revealed them." Her eyes flicked up, meeting his. "You know," he continued, "there's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge ends something. Justice begins something new." The words lingered between them like smoke and light sharing the same breath. Over time, their conversations grew softer, deeper. He would bring her case files to review pro bono lawsuits, civil rights disputes, women seeking protection from corporations that had silenced them. She helped quietly at first. Her legal mind, dormant for years, woke like a lion stretching after sleep. Each case reignited something she thought she'd lost: purpose. One night, after hours of drafting statements together, she fell back in her chair, exhausted, but exhilarated. "Do you know what this feels like?" she asked. He smiled. "Like coming home." She nodded slowly. "Yes, but not to a place, to myself." Sterling watched her in the low glow of the desk lamp, the gold light pooling across her cheekbones, the determination in her eyes. "You're dangerous when you believe in yourself," he murmured. Lupita laughed, the sound quiet but alive. "Then maybe it's time someone was afraid of me." But awakening comes with a cost. The more she worked with Sterling, the more she saw how corrupt her ex-husband's empire truly was. Bribes, shell companies, charities used as fronts. The same network that had once dismissed her now trembled at the mention of her name. And she wasn't done. Late one night, she sat alone at her father's desk, surrounded by files and contracts. Her hand hovered over a document bearing the Samberg seal. It was proof, undeniable and damning. Sterling entered quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You found it." She didn't look up. "If I sign this, there's no going back." He placed the cups down, his voice steady. "Then don't look back." For a moment she hesitated, then she signed. The pen felt heavier than a weapon. When she finished, Sterling exhaled slowly. "You just changed everything." Lupita looked at him, really looked. and for the first time the fear was gone. "No," she said softly. "I just remembered who I was before I forgot." That night, they did not speak much. They stood on the porch outside the house, the summer air thick with the scent of magnolia. Sterling turned to her. "When your father died, I thought you'd disappear. But you're brighter now than you've ever been." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I just stopped waiting for permission to shine." He nodded. "Whatever comes next, you won't face it alone." Lupita met his gaze, and something in his eyes, quiet, unspoken, undeniable, made her heart ache in the best possible way. There was no kiss, no confession, only the gravity of two souls orbiting closer than they meant to. When he finally left, she stayed on the porch, watching the fireflies rise from the grass like tiny sparks of faith. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat steady and strong. Awakening, she thought, doesn't come with thunder. It comes with truth. And in that truth, she was finally free. That same night, a courier from New York arrived at the gate, a letter sealed with the Samberg crest. It was from Eleanor. "We need to talk." Lupita held the envelope against her palm, feeling its weight. The past, it seemed, wasn't done testing her resolve, not yet. Morning light spilled through the wide windows of Lupita's new apartment, painting the wooden floors with gentle gold. The space was modest, a reclaimed brownstone in Brooklyn, not the marble mausoleum she'd once called home, yet it felt alive. There were plants by the window, the faint hum of a jazz record, and the scent of chamomile tea curling through the air like forgiveness in motion. She had just finished reading through a new case file when the buzzer rang. No one visited unannounced. She hesitated before pressing the intercom. "Yes." A pause, then a voice she knew too well, cold, precise, impossible to mistake. "Mrs. Harris," it said, though the name sounded foreign on that tongue. "It's Eleanor Samberg. May I come in?" For a heartbeat, Lupita thought she'd imagined it. Then the voice came again, softer this time. "Please." She could have said no. She could have hung up, closed that chapter forever. But something inside her, the part her father called mercy, sharpened by wisdom, whispered that unfinished things have a way of haunting the living. "Third floor," she said quietly, and pressed the door release. When Eleanor entered, her perfume arrived first, a sharp, expensive scent that clung to memories of a house where Lupita had once walked on eggshells. The older woman stood at the doorway, her posture as rigid as ever, but her eyes had lost their certainty. She looked smaller somehow, though she wore her power like a fur coat, heavy, inherited, suffocating. "Nice place," Eleanor said, glancing around the click of her heels, too loud for the soft wooden floor. "Simpler than what you're used to, I imagine." Lupita smiled faintly. Simplicity has a different kind of wealth. Eleanor's mouth twitched, unsure whether it was an insult or a truth she'd never understood. "Tea," Lupita offered. "I don't usually drink tea. Then today can be an exception." They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. Between them, a pot of steaming tea. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of the city drifted in through the window, a siren far away, footsteps on wet pavement, life going on as it always does when hearts are breaking quietly. Finally, Eleanor exhaled. "You must think I'm the villain." Lupita stirred her cup, eyes calm. "I think you're human." "That's generous." "It's accurate." Eleanor looked down at her gloved hands, twisting the leather fingers together. "I didn't come here to fight." "Then why did you come?" The older woman hesitated, and for a second Lupita caught a glimpse of the truth beneath her armor. Not cruelty, but confusion. "I suppose," Eleanor said slowly, "because everything I built has fallen apart, and I needed to see the woman who didn't. The honesty in that line startled them both. Silence expanded between them like a fragile bridge. Lupita could have gloated. She could have reminded Eleanor of every insult, every dinner where her voice had been dismissed, every headline calling her a gold digger. But instead, she said softly, "You don't lose an empire overnight, Eleanor. It crumbles one denial at a time." Eleanor looked up sharply. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't wake up every morning replaying what I said, what I did?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, she wasn't the imperious matriarch of the Samberg dynasty. She was just a woman, watching her legacy dissolve into dust. "You hated me," Lupita said quietly. "I feared you." The confession landed like a whisper of thunder. "I feared," Eleanor continued, "how easily my son could love you. How you walked into that house and made everyone see what they were not: decent, honest, real. I feared what that said about me." Her voice trembled. "So I destroyed you before you could remind me of my own emptiness." Lupita's chest tightened, not out of pity but recognition. She'd spent years trying to decode cruelty, never realizing it was often rooted in grief too old to name. Outside, a breeze rustled through the window, carrying the faint scent of rain. "You were right to leave," Eleanor said. "You were right about everything." Lupita shook her head. "No, I wasn't right. I was just done." The older woman gave a small, humorless laugh. "You sound like him." Lupita frowned. Eleanor's eyes softened, grief flickering across them, like the shadow of a lost photograph. "No. Your father." Lupita blinked. "You knew my father years ago. We were both at a legal conference in D.C. He spoke about ethics as if it were poetry. Said something I never forgot. You can't build a legacy on fear. It collapses the moment someone loves without your permission." Lupita felt the air leave her lungs. "He was right," Eleanor whispered. "And I lived my whole life proving him right." They sat in quiet for a long time. Finally, Lupita spoke, her tone low, but unwavering. "Do you know what I realized? Eleanor, power isn't about who wins. It's about who remains kind after losing." Eleanor's hands shook slightly. "And what about forgiveness?" "It's not a gift," Lupita said. "It's a decision. One I made the day I walked away." Eleanor stared at her, searching her face for anger, for superiority, but found only calm. "I don't hate you," Lupita added softly. "Hatred is too expensive. I spent enough of my life investing in pain that never paid dividends." The older woman's lip trembled. "You talk like a lawyer." "No," Lupita said, smiling faintly, "like a woman who finally understands her worth." Eleanor reached for her tea, but didn't drink. Her reflection wavered in the porcelain. "I came here to ask if you'd ever let Alan see the children," she said suddenly. Lupita froze. "They're not born yet," she said quietly. "I know," Eleanor replied. "But when they are, he'll want to." Lupita looked out the window, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. The twins stirred gently, a reminder that the future was already in motion. "I don't know what kind of father he'll be," she said. "But I know what kind of mother I want to be, one who never teaches them to love someone who disrespects them." Eleanor's eyes filled, though she blinked the tears back like a soldier refusing surrender. "You sound like him again," she said. "Your father." Lupita smiled sadly. "Then maybe he left me more than his books." When Eleanor finally stood, she looked older than when she'd arrived, but lighter somehow, as if setting down a burden that had never been hers to carry. At the door, she turned once more. "You've won, Lupita. I hope it was worth it." Lupita met her gaze calm and steady. It wasn't about winning. It was about becoming. Eleanor nodded slowly, the faintest curve of respect touching her mouth. "You know," she said, voice low, "you remind me of the woman I once wanted to be." And with that she left. The apartment felt impossibly quiet once the door closed. Lupita stood there for a long time, listening to the echo of footsteps fading down the hall. She returned to the table, lifted her cup, and took a single sip of the tea that had gone cold. Through the window, the sky was breaking open a soft drizzle, turning sunlight into silver mist. She whispered not to anyone, but to the ghosts that had watched from the corners of her heart. Let it end here. Then she walked to the door and locked it, not out of fear, but finality. When she leaned her forehead against the wood, a deep exhale escaped her lips, trembling but free. Behind her, the record kept spinning a slow, tender jazz tune that filled the empty spaces with something resembling grace. Outside, rain washed the city clean, and somewhere in that sound, Lupita realized forgiveness wasn't a surrender. It was a reclamation. The kind her father would have called justice without judgment. Her phone buzzed a message from Sterling. "We need to meet. It's begun." She read it twice, her pulse quickening. The fight she thought she'd ended was far from over, but this time she wouldn't be fighting alone. The world didn't end with thunder. It ended quietly with a headline. Blackwood Industries acquires Samberg Group in historic merger. The words flashed across every television screen, every stock ticker, every news feed that once glorified Allen's family name. By noon, reporters were camped outside the Samberg Tower, now renamed Harris Justice Center. A new plaque gleamed at the entrance, its letters engraved in clean brass, in honor of those who built with integrity. The city, always hungry for new kings and fallen idols, devoured the story. To them, it was business empire swallowing empire. To Lupita, it was something else entirely, the sound of a cage unlocking. She watched the news from her apartment, wrapped in a cream-colored robe. Morning light filtered through the blinds, cutting soft lines across her face. The anchor's voice filled the room. Sources confirmed the buyout was orchestrated by Sterling Blackwood, who now assumes full control of Samberg's assets under the new corporate identity. Insiders suggest the deal includes a philanthropic division spearheaded by attorney Lupita Harris. Her hand paused midair, the spoon clinking against her teacup. She hadn't asked for her name to be there. Sterling must have added it quietly, deliberately, like a man who understood that legacy should be shared, not gifted. Her reflection in the window looked calmer than she felt. This was what she'd worked for: the restoration of her father's ideals, the redemption of her own name. Yet somewhere deep beneath the satisfaction was a hollow ache. Justice always came with collateral damage. The phone began to ring. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Allen. For a moment, she let it ring, each vibration a ghost knocking on the door she had already closed. Then, against her better judgment, she answered. "Lupita." His voice was hoarse, stripped of its arrogance. "I just saw the news." She said nothing. "I don't understand," he continued. Why would you let him use your name? Why make this public?" She almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but disbelief. "You still think this is about you?" He hesitated. "Isn't it?" Her voice was calm, almost kind. "No, Allen. This is about truth, about restoring what you buried under lies and greed. Do you think this makes you better than me?" His tone sharpened. "You'll destroy everything we built." She looked out the window where sunlight poured across the skyline like liquid gold. "We built nothing together," she said softly. "You built walls. I learned how to walk through them." There was silence, the kind that stretched until something inside both of them cracked. Then, barely audible, "I never stopped loving you." The words should have meant something once. Now they were echoes of a language she no longer spoke. "You loved control," she whispered. "And when you lost it, you called it love. He exhaled shakily. Please, Lupita. Just tell me what you want. She closed her eyes, her hand instinctively resting over her stomach, feeling the faint stir of the life growing inside. I want peace, she said. And that means silence. And before he could respond, she ended the call. For a long time she stood still, phone in hand, heart steady. Outside the city hummed with its usual rhythm. A taxi honked. Somewhere below, a child laughed. Life continued unbothered by the wreckage of dynasties. Lupita walked to the balcony. The wind tugged gently at her hair. She could see the distant shimmer of the Harris Justice Center, her name now gleaming on the tower that once symbolized everything she wasn't allowed to touch. But she didn't feel triumph. What she felt was gravity, the weight of how much power could change a person if they weren't careful. The doorbell broke her thoughts. When she opened it, Sterling was there. He looked tired, like someone who'd spent the night negotiating not with men, but with ghosts. His tie was loosened, his eyes shadowed with a kind of tenderness that came only from understanding. You saw it, he asked. I did. He smiled faintly. They wanted to call it Blackwood Tower. I thought that sounded predictable. And so you used my name instead. He hesitated. I used the name that meant something real. Lupita's lips parted, but no words came. For months they'd fought side by side, drafting contracts exposing fraud, dismantling a machine built on corruption. Yet in this quiet morning light, their partnership felt like something more fragile. You've given me too much credit, she said finally. No, he replied. You've just given yourself too little. He walked past her, setting a folder on the table. The transition is complete. You're free, Lupita. The shares, the titles, everything Alan used to hold is gone. She stared at the papers, the signatures that represented years of humiliation rewritten in her favor. Freedom. It turned out didn't roar. It whispered. They sat in silence for a while. Does it ever bother you? She asked quietly. What? That justice feels so much like loss. Sterling leaned back, considering. Justice doesn't erase pain, Lupita. It just gives it meaning. She turned toward him. And what if meaning isn't enough? He smiled, the kind of smile that carried more empathy than comfort. Then maybe what you're looking for isn't justice anymore. Their eyes met, and for the first time she didn't look away. Later, when he left the apartment, felt too still again. Lupita poured herself another cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the afternoon light drift across the skyline. Her phone buzzed messages, notifications, congratulations from people who once avoided her name. She ignored them all. Because the victory that mattered wasn't on the news. It was the quiet inside her chest, the stillness that came from no longer needing to prove she belonged. She thought of Eleanor, of their conversation, of the tremor in the older woman's voice. She thought of Alan, somewhere out there, watching his world shrink to the size of his regret. And she thought of her father, his words etched into her bones. Dignity is the only wealth no one can steal. Now she finally understood. Dignity wasn't what you demanded from others. It was what you gave yourself when you refused to hate them. As dusk fell, she walked out onto the balcony again. The city glowed beneath her neon signs, yellow cabs, the river like a vein of light. For the first time, she felt something close to serenity. Her phone buzzed once more, a message from Sterling. The board is asking if you'll attend the ceremony tomorrow. They're unveiling the plaque. She typed back, I might, if the world feels quiet enough. He replied almost instantly, then I hope it rains. The world is always quieter in the rain. She smiled, small, unguarded, real. That night, Lupita couldn't sleep. She wandered through the apartment, stopping by the mirror. For years, she'd looked into mirrors trying to see what others saw. The wife, the mistake, the scandal. Now she saw only herself. No titles, no shame. Just a woman who had survived, and somehow softened in survival. The rain began to fall outside, tapping gently against the glass. She whispered into the dimness almost to herself. He wanted me gone. Now he has that. The words carried no bitterness, only release. Then she turned off the light, leaving only the sound of the rain. The next morning she woke to a message from the hospital. Routine checkup, the nurse said, but her heart raced as she read the note. Ms. Harris, we'd like to discuss some irregularities in your latest scan. She stared at the screen, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. Outside, the sun was rising gold and unbothered, but inside her chest a new storm was quietly forming. It began with a whisper, a small, unfamiliar ache beneath her ribs. Lupita had been asleep only an hour, when the pain came again, sharper this time, slicing through the quiet like lightning under skin. She gasped, reaching instinctively for the edge of the bed. The sheets were cold, the world tilting. She tried to breathe through it. Too early, she thought. It's too early. The clock on the nightstand read 2:17 a.m. Outside, snow fell like feathers, coating the city in fragile silence. Inside, her body trembled with a rhythm older than fear. She pressed a hand to her stomach, 2 heartbeats fluttering within, too small, too precious, too soon. By the time the ambulance arrived, her vision blurred at the edges. The paramedics' voices came to her like echoes through glass. 34 weeks, she managed to say. Twins. They nodded, already moving, already lifting her. The city lights streaked across her eyes as they sped through the frozen streets. She clung to one thought. Stay alive, for them. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and urgency. Machines blinked like tired stars. And then through the chaos, a familiar voice, warm, steady, grounding. Lupita Sterling. He appeared at her side, still in his suit, snow clinging to his coat. His hand found hers without hesitation. What happened? He asked the doctor. Preterm labor. We're doing everything we can. The pain came again, a wave this time, fierce and consuming. Lupita gritted her teeth, clutching Sterling's hand. I'm right here, he murmured. Look at me, Lupita. Breathe. She did. Through tears, through panic, through the sound of her own heartbeat thundering like war drums. Hours blurred into a storm of light and motion. Nurses' monitors, instructions she couldn't hold on to. Somewhere she heard Evangeline's voice, her mother's firm but trembling. Stay strong, baby. You hear me. You've got generations behind you. Lupita turned her head, catching a glimpse of her mother's face, lined with worry, but illuminated by something fierce and divine. I'm not afraid, Lupita whispered, though the words broke halfway. Not anymore. Her mother kissed her forehead. Good. Because strength runs in your blood, child. Not from them. She nodded toward the hallway where the echoes of shouting could be heard. But from me. From you. Out in the corridor, chaos brewed. The Sambergs had arrived. Reporters had followed the scent of Scandal, a former heiress in labor. Her billionaire ex's family, demanding legal clarity over bloodlines. Alan's mother, Eleanor, stood at the center of it all, her face pale and hard. She demanded to see Lupita shouting words like inheritance and rights to a crowd of cameras. Sterling stepped into the hallway, his voice calm but deadly. This is a hospital, not a courtroom. Eleanor turned on him. You don't get to dictate what my grandchildren are. Grandchildren, he said softly. You never called them that when you tried to erase their mother. For a moment, even she had no reply. Security arrived, firm but polite. The crowd was ushered back. The cameras dimmed, and the hallway fell quiet again, except for the hum of the machines inside the delivery room. Sterling stood outside the door chest, heaving hands still shaking from holding himself together. Inside Lupita's body trembled with the rhythm of creation. Pain surged like waves breaking against her ribs, relentless, primal, holy. Each contraction stole her breath, but somewhere deep inside, something else was being born, not just life, but faith. She thought of everything she'd endured, humiliation, betrayal, loneliness, and realized it had all been leading here to this moment where she would deliver not only her children, but herself reborn. When the first cry tore through the room, it wasn't fragile. It was fierce, a sound that demanded the world make space. The doctor smiled. A girl. Lupita's tears spilled freely now. Amara, she whispered the name, trembling like prayer. And then came the second cry, smaller but steady, a rhythm that answered his sister's like harmony. A boy, the nurse said gently. Malcolm, Lupita breathed. You made it, my loves. You made it. Evangeline wept openly, holding her daughter's hand, whispering words of gratitude to every ancestor she could remember. Sterling entered quietly, stopping by the door. His eyes softened at the sight, Lupita exhausted, but radiant, two tiny beings in her arms, the sterile light above them glowing like the first sunrise. She looked up and smiled faintly. We did it. You did, he said. You always do, always. Later, when the babies were taken for observation, Lupita sat alone in the dim hospital room. The world outside was still snow and silence. Her body ached. Her heart did not. The pain had become something sacred, proof that she could endure, that creation was not born out of ease, but defiance. Her mother slept in a chair by the window. Sterling stood at the door, his tie undone, his expression unreadable. You should rest, he said softly. So should you. He smiled, moving closer. You scared me tonight. I scared myself, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. But somewhere between the pain and the light, I realized I wasn't fighting anymore. Fighting what? The past. He nodded slowly. Then maybe this is the beginning. Lupita looked at him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but shining with quiet clarity. You know, Sterling, for so long I thought power was about control, but it's not. He tilted his head. What is it then? It's about softness, she said. The kind that can survive fire. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached down, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, and whispered, Then you're the most powerful woman I've ever known. At dawn, snow still drifted past the window, soft, slow, endless. Lupita stirred, feeling the emptiness of her arms where her babies had been. She rose weakly, crossing to the nursery window. Behind the glass, two tiny forms lay side by side, one wrapped in ivory, the other in pale blue. Their chests rose and fell in perfect unison. She pressed her hand against the glass. You'll never know what it cost to bring you here, she murmured. And you'll never need to. Behind her, Evangeline joined her, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. They're perfect, she said softly. They're free, Lupita whispered. Outside, the first rays of sun began to pierce the clouds, painting the snow in gold. Evangeline smiled. That's what your father used to call redemption, when light touches what was meant to stay dark. Lupita nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Then I guess this is his sunrise too. Later that morning, reporters waited outside again. But this time, there were no statements, no headlines. The hospital released only a short message. Mother and twins are healthy. No further comment. The world wanted spectacle. Lupita chose peace. From her bed, she watched the snow melt on the window pane, the drops sliding down like the final tears she'd kept hidden too long. Evangeline hummed a lullaby one passed down through generations of women who had endured, quietly loved, loudly, and survived completely. Sterling entered the room again, holding 2 tiny bracelets engraved in gold. He handed them to Lupita. One read, Amara. The other, Malcolm. She traced the names with her thumb. They'll grow up in love, Sterling. Not pity, not fear, just love. He nodded. Then the world already belongs to them. As night fell again, the hospital lights dimmed. Lupita lay awake, the twins asleep beside her, the rhythmic sound of their breathing lulling her like a promise. Outside, snow continued to fall, not heavy this time, just enough to remind her that every ending could be rewritten. She closed her eyes and whispered to the storm, to her father, to herself. The pain was never punishment. It was the path. And with that, Lupita Harris, lawyer, daughter, lover, mother, finally slept. The snow kept falling soft and merciful, as if the heavens themselves were weeping, not from sorrow, but from relief. When she woke the next morning, a letter waited on her bedside table. No sender. Only one line typed neatly on ivory paper. There are debts even justice cannot settle. Meet me tomorrow, S. Lupita's pulse quickened. She looked down at her sleeping children, then at the sunrise breaking over the city. A new chapter was calling, one that would test not her strength, but her heart. A year had passed since that winter night, the one when pain gave birth to light. Spring returned to New York in quiet colors, pale cherry blossoms along the river, soft rain against glass, and the hum of renewal in the air. Inside the ballroom of the Grand Savoy Hotel, the city's most powerful gathered journalists, philanthropists, artists, and women whose names once appeared in gossip columns, but now filled boardrooms. The evening's banner read, "The Rebirth Gala," celebrating women who begin again. And when the lights dimmed and the soft notes of a cello filled the room, all eyes turned to the entrance to Lupita Harris. She wore white, not the sterile white of surrender, but the luminous white of forgiveness, clean, grounded, unafraid. Her gown flowed like liquid silk, simple and unembellished. She walked with a confidence that wasn't loud but undeniable, the kind that came from knowing who she was and no longer apologizing for it. Beside her, Sterling moved with the same quiet steadiness he always had. Tall, reserved, his presence less like a spotlight and more like gravity. When they reached the center of the room, he leaned close, his voice low, meant only for her. "I've never seen anyone look so beautiful without trying to prove anything," he murmured. Lupita smiled, that soft, private smile that had become her signature. "That's because I'm not searching for love anymore," she said gently. "It found me when I stopped being afraid of it." He didn't answer, just squeezed her hand, the faintest tremor of reverence in his touch. The gala unfolded in shimmering tones of gold and laughter. Guests mingled, champagne flowed, and the quiet energy of something new lingered in the air. When it was time for the main speech, Sterling stepped aside, letting Lupita walk toward the stage. The crowd hushed. She stood behind the podium, the spotlight soft on her face. For a moment, she said nothing, simply scanned the faces before her. Some were friends, others strangers. A few were the same people who had once turned their backs on her. But tonight, none of that mattered. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm and luminous. A hush fell deeper. "A year ago, I was in a hospital bed," she said. "Exhausted, terrified, but holding 2 lives that reminded me what courage feels like. I thought my story had ended when my marriage did. But it hadn't. It had just begun." She paused. Sterling's eyes found hers from the crowd, steady, anchoring. I used to believe strength meant silence, she continued. That dignity meant enduring. But now I know dignity also means beginning again, even when no one believes you can. Applause swelled warm and honest. Her voice softened. So tonight, I'm proud to announce the creation of the Harris Foundation for Renewal, a fund dedicated to supporting women rebuilding their lives after divorce or loss. Not out of pity, but partnership. Not out of charity, but shared courage. The audience rose in ovation. Cameras flashed, but Lupita didn't look at them. She looked at Sterling, whose expression was unreadable, except for the light in his eyes. It wasn't pride. It wasn't desire. It was something quieter, purer. Admiration. After the applause faded and the music returned, Lupita stepped down from the stage. Sterling met her halfway, offering his hand, not as a businessman, not as a savior, but as a man who understood that real love stands beside, never above. You were extraordinary, he said softly. She exhaled. I was honest. That's rarer. They walked toward the terrace, away from the noise and glitter. Outside, the night was gentle, the city lights reflecting in the glass towers, the scent of rain still clinging to the air. For a long time, they said nothing. Lupita leaned against the railing, looking at the skyline. Do you ever think, she asked quietly, that peace can feel heavier than pain? He smiled faintly. Only when you're not used to it. She turned to him. I spent years waiting for someone to save me. Then I realized the only person who could was me. Sterling's gaze softened. And now, she said, I just want to build something worth leaving behind. He nodded toward the ballroom. You already are. They stood there in silence. The city moving below them like a living organism. Sirens' laughter, and the occasional flare of headlights weaving through the dark. Then Sterling said quietly, You know you could run the foundation full time. I'd fund it, no strings attached. She turned sharply. No. He raised an eyebrow. She smiled. Not because I don't trust you. Because I want to prove that women can build empires of compassion without owing anyone their freedom. His expression softened. You always were your father's daughter. Her breath caught. You met him once, didn't you? Yes, he said. He told me that real justice isn't about punishment. It's about giving the wounded a place to rest. Lupita's eyes glistened. That sounds like him. Sterling nodded. It also sounds like you. For a moment, neither spoke. The night wind brushed between them, cool, electric, full of possibilities that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. Inside, the music shifted, a slow jazz number, something old and aching. Sterling offered his hand again, this time in invitation. Dance with me. Lupita hesitated. Here, he said simply. So she placed her hand in his, and they began to move small, deliberate steps, their silhouettes outlined by the city's distant lights. It wasn't passion that moved them. It was recognition. Two people who had survived the same storm, now learning how to exist in calm weather. At one point, Sterling murmured, Do you ever think about him? She didn't pretend not to know who he meant. Sometimes she admitted, but not with anger. More like, remembering a version of myself I've outgrown. That's a kind of forgiveness. It's the only kind that lasts. When the song ended, neither of them stepped away. The door opened behind them, a soft interruption. Evangeline appeared elegant as ever, holding two small hands, Amara and Malcolm, now toddling, eyes wide with wonder at the city's glittering skyline. Mama, Amara said, reaching out. Lupita knelt, gathering them close. Hey, my loves, did you behave for Grandma? They clapped for you, Evangeline said, smiling. Didn't understand why, but they did. Lupita laughed softly, kissing their foreheads. That's enough understanding for now. Sterling crouched beside them, his large hands gentle as he fixed Malcolm's tiny bow tie. You look like trouble, young man. Malcolm giggled. For a moment, the four of them stood together, not a family in the traditional sense, but something stronger, a constellation formed by choice, not chance. Evangeline excused herself, carrying the children back inside. The terrace grew quiet again. Lupita turned back to Sterling. You've been there for every storm, she said. Why? Because I saw light in you before you believed it existed, he replied. Her throat tightened. And if I falter again? He smiled. Then I'll remind you. Not because you need saving, but because everyone needs reminding. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You always say the right thing. I don't, he said. I just mean it. The city clock struck midnight. Inside the gala began to fade, lights dimming, laughter softening. Lupita looked up at the stars, barely visible beyond the city's haze. Do you think people change? Sterling looked at her. No, he said. I think they return to who they were before fear taught them to hide. She turned to him, eyes glimmering. Then maybe love isn't something new. Maybe it's just something that comes back when we're ready. He reached for her hand, fingers brushing hers like a promise. Then, let it return, he said. And under the soft hum of the city, beneath the glow of a world finally forgiving itself, Lupita smiled, not the smile of a woman in love, but of a woman finally at peace with being loved. Later that night, she found a note slipped into her clutch. No name, just a sentence typed on fine paper. Every light casts a shadow. Be ready. Lupita looked toward the skyline where her name shone on the Harris Justice Center. The world still owed her peace, but it seemed it wasn't done testing her strength just yet. 5 years later, the world had softened. The house by the sea shimmered beneath the morning sun. Whitewashed walls, blue shutters, and a garden filled with the scent of salt and jasmine. Wind carried laughter through the open windows, mingling with the sound of waves colliding against the cliffs below. Lupita sat at a wooden table on the terrace, her journal open beside a steaming cup of coffee. Sunlight fell across her skin, painting it in gold. Her hair, shorter now, streaked with sun, fluttered against her cheek. She looked peaceful the way people do when they have nothing left to prove. From the garden, Amara's voice drifted through the air, soft, melodic, reading a poem she'd written herself. There are two kinds of light, the girl recited, one that burns and one that heals. Malcolm sprawled on the grass beside her, interrupted with a giggle. You made that up, Amara stuck out her tongue. Maybe. But Mama says words can be real if you believe them. Lupita smiled, closing her eyes. The world she had fought for was no longer made of glass and marble. It was made of sunlight and children's laughter. Footsteps approached from behind. Sterling emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one beside her and leaned down to kiss the crown of her head. You still write every morning, he said softly. It's how I keep my peace. He smiled, sitting opposite her. And do you ever run out of words? She looked at him, a small curve lifting her lips. Never. I used to write to survive. Now I write to remember. He handed her a pen that had once belonged to her father, its gold tip dulled by time but still steady. Then write something worth remembering. She met his gaze, the unspoken warmth between them thick as sunlight. The wind carried the faint sound of waves breaking against rock. Seagulls circled above the horizon, their cries like echoes of freedom. Sterling watched the children for a moment, then turned to her. They've grown so fast. Lupita nodded. Too fast. Some days I still expect to wake up in that hospital room wondering if they'll make it through the night. But they did, he said. They did, she agreed. Maybe they saved me as much as I saved them. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers, a gesture so familiar now it felt like breathing. "Tell me something," he said. "Have you forgiven them?" She tilted her head, studying the way sunlight framed his face. "The Sambergs." He nodded. Her eyes softened. "No." He frowned slightly. She smiled. "Because forgiveness isn't needed. They don't live here anymore. Not in my world. Not in my story. I made peace with their ghosts by refusing to feed them." Sterling leaned back, the ocean wind lifting the edges of his shirt. "You're remarkable." She shook her head gently. "No, just healed." He took a sip of his coffee, then said, "There's something I need to tell you." Lupita looked up. "The Harris Foundation has expanded," he said. "We've opened 2 new centers, one in Atlanta, one in Johannesburg, all under your name." Her eyes widened. "Sterling, it's not a gift," he said quickly. "It's a continuation. You started this movement. I just kept the doors open." Her throat tightened. "I didn't want my name to be everywhere." "It's not your name they'll remember," he said. "It's your story." The words landed gently but deep. She closed her journal and exhaled. "Then maybe it's time I tell it properly." "You mean the book?" She nodded. "All of it. The pain, the loss, the rebuilding. Not as revenge, as testimony." Sterling's smile carried pride and something else, something softer. "Then the world's about to know the truth." As the sun climbed higher, Amara and Malcolm ran up the steps breathless. "Mama, we found shells," Malcolm shouted, holding up 2 small spirals of pearly white. Lupita knelt, brushing sand from his hands. "They're beautiful," she said, "like tiny homes that survive the sea." Amara tugged her sleeve. "Can we go swimming after lunch?" "If the tide's low," Lupita said. "Ask your grandmother." Evangeline appeared at the door, still regal in her linen dress, carrying a basket of freshly cut herbs. "Grandmother says yes if they eat first." Lupita laughed, shaking her head. "You spoil them." Evangeline smiled knowingly. "That's what grandmothers are for. You handle the lessons. I handle the joy." She looked at Sterling, her gaze approving. "You're staying for dinner." "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. "Good," Evangeline said. "Then make yourself useful. The grill's waiting." As the day unfolded, the small house filled with the easy chaos of family, the sound of chopping vegetables, laughter over burned bread, the clinking of glasses. Lupita watched them from the porch, her mother humming Sterling, pretending to lose an argument to Amara Malcolm, chasing the dog through the grass. A year ago, she wouldn't have believed peace could feel so alive. Now it pulsed in everything around her, in the salt on the wind, the laughter in her son's lungs, the warmth of Sterling's gaze when he caught her watching him. That evening, after the children were asleep, Lupita returned to the terrace. The ocean shimmered under the moonlight, each wave folding into the next, like pages turning in a book. Sterling joined her, carrying a blanket. He draped it around her shoulders, then sat beside her. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "The city, the noise, the chase." She smiled faintly. "No. I chased so many things that never belonged to me. This," she gestured toward the sea, the stars, "the quiet, this belongs." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You know, the first time I saw you, I thought you were made of fire." She laughed softly. "And now I know you're made of light. Fire burns. Light endures." Her chest tightened, not with longing, but gratitude. "You always did know how to say the right thing." He shrugged. "Only when I mean it." They fell into silence, their hands finding each other in the dark. Lupita opened her journal again, the pages fluttering in the sea breeze. She wrote slowly, her handwriting firm and unhurried. Love isn't about holding on. It's about learning yourself deeply enough that you no longer need to prove you're worthy of being held. She looked at the line for a long time, then closed the journal. Done? Sterling asked. For today, she said. The rest will write itself. They sat together as the first stars began to appear, faint but steadfast. In the distance, the children stirred. A dream, murmured a sigh. The small sounds of growing lives. Lupita smiled, her eyes still on the horizon. Do you ever think they'll ask about the past? They will, Sterling said. And what will we tell them? That their mother fought for light, he said, and found it. She turned to him, eyes glistening. That's enough. It's everything. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the sea and blooming lavender. Above them, a flock of birds crossed the sky, their wings catching the last orange glow of sunset. Evangeline's voice called faintly from inside. Come in before it gets cold. Lupita stood, pausing for one last look at the horizon. The world no longer felt like something she needed to conquer. It felt like something she'd made peace with. As they turned toward the house, Sterling slipped his arm around her shoulders. The light from inside spilled across the porch, golden and soft, wrapping them in warmth. And for the first time in years, Lupita felt entirely whole, not because she had found love, but because she had become it. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, she opened her journal one last time. At the bottom of the final page, she wrote, For every woman who ever thought her story ended in loss, may she know that loss is only the beginning of her light. She set down the pen, closed the book, and placed it by the window. Outside, the tide rolled in, carrying the reflection of 1,000 stars. And above it all, the moon hung steady, not full, not perfect, but enough, just like her.